Jacob's legal background and all the activities that he does, behind the scenes. But no, so I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm putting together this slate, and I'm like, this is almost too easy, but yet like super difficult because
Yeah.
as we go through historical like evidence and facts, right? Like typically you're not going to have two receivers on the same team go off. I think that's only happened twice over like the last like 5 years. You're not going to have, it's going to be a lot of runbacks to an extent from the research that I was doing. But at the same time, like, I don't know that we've ever seen offensive juggernauts like this go head to head, because in so many cases you had like the Green Bay Packers, for example, where the Green Bay Packers have historically have had like one receiver, which is Devontae Adams over the past, 4 or 5 years, right? The other one was the Tennessee Titans, and all they had was AJ Brown. So it was different from a lot of the evidence that we've seen of which teams actually make it, which I think has a big piece to do with how the NFL is transitioning into that quarterback friendly type, atmosphere that everybody's been talking about, but we haven't necessarily seen it lead to playoff implications up until now.
Yeah, the game that I think reminds you the most of this Bengals Chiefs game in recent years, just in terms of the setup and in terms of at least how I think people expect it to go, is probably like the Patriots Chiefs one in Arrowhead from, I think it was 2018 playoffs, though, so it would have been in 2019. And that one had like 68 points. And that was two teams where, everybody had a lot of high scoring options. I don't have the box score in front of me. I tried to just pull it up, and I keep getting weird 404 links. But anyhow, that was a game that ended 37-31 in overtime. It had two offenses. Of course, the Chiefs, similar to they are today, right? I mean, it's the Kelsey and Hill show. And I think the Patriots at that point had like Edelman. I think Amendola might have still been a part of that team. I'm not sure. James White, of course. Gronk, of course, on that team. So, interesting notes. I think at the NFC side, it's weird, like it's a lot harder to talk yourself into playing the NFC side because the 49ers, I mean, not only is it just the offenses, right? Like you have the Rams can put up points the same way that the Chiefs and the Bengals can put up points. I have no worries about the Rams, right? And the Rams defense is good, but teams have put up points on the Rams, right? We've seen it. It's just the 49ers that really, really scare you. Like if the Packers had won that game, I think you'd still see similar ownership consolidation on the Bengals Chiefs side because it still would profile as the better game, the faster game, less great defenses, better weather probably. But it's just so much easier to talk yourself into a Packers-Rams shootout eclipsing the other game. But like the 49ers really screw it up, man. Like, I mean, Jimmy G has been horrendous in the playoffs, truly horrendous. Like in his last 19 quarters of playoff football, he has one passing touchdown.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Rancid.
It's absolutely horrible.
He wins anyway, but my God. And then of course the Rams, they'll happily play it slow and run the ball, I think, if that's the other team wants to do, and they're leading. So it's just really tough. If there's a bright spot, I think, for where you would talk yourself into that game, it would be just put yourself in the position we were in 2 weeks ago, right? The Rams and the 49ers had just played a thrilling back and forth overtime game. I believe it was 30-24 in overtime. So definitely went over what the total is this weekend. And then the 49ers went into a game with the Cowboys, and they played in the highest owned game on the entire slate. Now, I mentioned why I thought that was bad at the time. However, like the market 2 weeks ago saw a game with the 49ers and the Cowboys. I think the Cowboys pretty similar to the Rams in terms of their offensive potency. And they said, yeah, this game's going to shoot out. And so now I think the market has frowned on the 49ers because of what we've seen mostly just last week in their ability to create a shootout. But maybe it's too confident.
Now, I do feel comfortable starting out with, 3 different stacks over here, right? So, like, I feel like I'm safe playing Stafford and Kupp. I feel safe playing Burrow, Chase. I feel safe playing, Mahomes and Tyreek Hill or Kelsey, whichever route you want to go with that one. But I mean, let me just throw something out there, right? Let me throw something out, Jacob, just in case you want to chase the dragon, which I advise normally against. But Jimmy Garoppolo, right?
No, we're not doing this.
Let me finish. Let me pitch this idea to you real quick. I'm not saying that. I just want to go out there because we had the 49ers, right? Who are the 49ers are 30th overall in pace of play, right? So that's not good, but the Rams are top 10.
Yeah.
So if we look at it like we did in week 18, where they did hit the over, it still wasn't great. They still didn't score a ton of points, and Jimmy Garoppolo was not involved. However, with the 49ers down by a touchdown in that game going into the third, and I just went blurry all of a sudden for whatever reason. They
super blurry.
Yeah, it's weird. I'll try and go not blurry here in a second, people. But anyways, they ran the ball 10 straight times on the way to a touchdown. The drive before that, they ran the ball a significant amount. In fact, the play that they scored the touchdown on, it was a passing play, but that was Deebo Samuel on a fake run that launched it deep to Juwan Johnson. So Garoppolo, right? Like, he didn't attempt a single pass on that one drive. The other pass he didn't attempt a ton on. But the Rams aren't that bad up against running backs where the 49ers should be able to do this like they do. Elijah Mitchell has not been, this explosive running back that we saw at the beginning of the season. He's been somewhat, mediocre to an extent. And Deebo Samuel, ever since, is his first 3 games following week 9, so like week 10, 11, 12.
Week 10, which was the first game against the Rams. That's when they really debuted him in this hybrid role.
Yeah, so, outside of those first 3 games, he's been somewhat, mediocre as a running back or a wide receiver that runs the ball. His efficiency's dropped tremendously. But the Rams have allowed, they haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher since week 5, I think. And then you have the 2 highest rushing totals were 91 yards and 85, which, by the way, were Elijah Mitchell. So if the 49ers aren't able to move the ball like they did, right? And we have a situation as to where the Rams go up and they don't relinquish the lead like they did in week 18. Let's hypothetically say that Jimmy Garoppolo actually is forced to pass on multiple occasions in the late third, early fourth quarter. Well, Jimmy Garoppolo, any time that he's passed 30 or more times, he's been pushing like 18 points, right? There was one game that he hit 16.68, but he's at least hitting 18. There's been a couple where he's hit like 25, 30 points, right? Which, by the way, if you played anybody that hit 25 points in the wild card or divisional.
He has hit 25 points once all year. He
had 30.
He hit 30. Well, that's because that was the same game. He hit 30.3 in week 8 versus Chicago. And that where he got the 322 passing yards. And he actually rushed for 2 touchdowns. So I guess
he did rush for 2
Jimmy
touchdowns.
To rush for 2 this week.
He rushed for 2 touchdowns.
He got 30.3. Since then, he did put up 23.3 the next week. And he has a couple other games where he has the 300-yard bonus. He had one against the Rams, one against Tennessee, where he hit that 300-yard bonus. But otherwise, he's mostly been living in like the 15 to 20 range has been the Jimmy zone. Mostly because they don't throw that much inside the 10. They run the ball a lot, or they do either they do the Deebo run, or they'll just hand it off to Mitchell or whatever. But he has a few games now. Like he had 316 passing yards against the Rams, just 1 touchdown. 322 against the Titans, just 1 touchdown. So they don't necessarily throw it a whole ton in there. He only has 20 passing touchdowns on the year.
And that's a major issue, of course. But the Rams defense has also not been, susceptible to rushing touchdowns as well, which was going to be in my next series of points. But if Jimmy G is forced to pass X amount of times, you're looking at a price range for Jimmy. What's he sitting at right now? $5,400, $2K less than Patrick Mahomes, right? And I'm not saying that I want to go chase the dragon. I really don't. But there is a world where George Kittle produce, at a high-end level. He started to produce a little bit last week, and he gets touchdowns in the red zone. That Deebo Samuel might not take the rushing handoffs and could end up with a couple of shovel passes or whatever the case is and breaks a big one. It's going to be heavily reliant on not only game script, but his players making plays for him, which did not happen last week and typically does not happen. But I think that there's a way that they could have it. My biggest thing, though, my biggest one that I want to bring up is Jennings. Because Jennings is over there at, how tall is Jennings? 6'5", I believe?
He's huge. Yeah, he's huge.
Okay, so they have this guy that's playing the slot over there. Deontay, I wrote about it last week because I wanted to see Alan Lazard one-on-one with him. He's been playing the slot for the Rams like big time as of late, like playing the majority of the snaps.
Is this Bembry?
It might be Bembry. I just had it up on my Twitter account. I was just looking at it. Give me 1 second and I'll pull it up. But anyways, this guy is like 5'9", right? Like he's 160 pounds. And if they move Juwan Jennings into the slot, we could actually see a ton of opportunity in the red zone, like we were just talking about, for Jimmy G to just toss it up to him, which in the past, that's pretty much what he's been doing with George Kittle. His name is Deontay Deayan.
Okay, and that's where Jennings crushed was against the Rams in Week 17. That was his lone big game of the year. Yeah.
And he had 43 yards up against Deayan, and then he had a touchdown on Jalen Ramsey, had a touchdown on, I believe it was Taylor, their safety.
Well, last touchdown was on nobody.
Last
touchdown, there was no one within 10 yards of him.
Okay, yeah, it was registered, one under Ramsey, one under the safety, and then 43 yards on 3 targets, 2 receptions against Deayan, if I remember correctly. So I'm just saying there's a chance, there is a world where Jimmy G could pay off. And if you're chasing the dragon, if you're trying to fade the chalk, whatever you're trying to do, there's a world that it could happen. But it has to be 100%. You have to be relying on the passing game because Elijah Mitchell is not going to do it for you, in my opinion, this game.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think you can play Jimmy G. I mean, well, you can play anyone. There's only 4 options, right?
Yes.
But at this point, like, to me, the salary just does not matter all that much on this small of a slate. It's almost like a showdown slate, and you really need raw points. And so it's really hard to convince yourself that Jimmy G can be the winning quarterback without being the highest scoring quarterback on such a small slate. You really need to hit the nuts elsewhere for that to be the case. And it's just, I mean, it's hard enough to convince yourself that Jimmy G is going to be the highest scoring quarterback in his own game. But is really Jimmy G is going to surpass Mahomes and Burrow. I mean, frankly, I think you're different enough playing Stafford and stacking that game to be higher scoring than the Chiefs-Bengals game that I'm more likely to take that route, I think. And especially with the Rams pass the ball this year at the highest rate of any team inside the 10. So if you're expecting negative game script for Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Whereas pretty much what they need to pass, because when they're in neutral or leading game script, they will run the shit out of the ball. Yep. And they don't even care if they're being efficient with it. Like they will just run. Like they have games where Elijah Mitchell's averaging 3 yards a carry. They don't give a shit. They'll give it to him 27 times. Like
the game that I brought up to you where they had the drive, they were down by 2 touchdowns. The first one they scored, it was the majority of it was runs. The second one, they didn't even pass it. Jimmy G didn't pass it. Deebo Samuel did on 1 attempt.
Yeah, so they don't even they're not a team where if they're averaging 3 yards a carry, they will stick with the run. They don't care. The only way that they abandon the run really is when they fall behind. And I think that the way you can usually talk yourself into that is, okay, well, one team gets ahead with rushing touchdowns, the other team comes from behind. The Rams just haven't been building leads all year with rushing touchdowns. They throw at an extraordinarily high rate inside the 10. So to me, if the Rams win this game, if they score more points than the 49ers, I think that they're getting there with Stafford touchdowns. Especially, after all the fumbles that they had like 3 different fumbles last week, 2 from Akers, 1 from Cooper Kupp, and then the snap over Matthew Stafford's head.
Yeah, it was bad.
So they've been efficient passing in the red zone all year. I don't expect that to change. And I think, again, like if you want to play that as your stack, if you play Stafford with Kupp and then extend it forward, with your ancillary pieces, Stafford and Kupp, and pick OBJ or Van or whatever, and then play one of the 49ers receiving weapons. I think that you can get different enough with that as your emphasis. You don't need to go to Jimmy G, but you can see it. I do think you need to find ways to be different, though, because I kind of just slotted through what I expect to be kind of a popular lineup build. And the lineup really makes itself. I mean, you mentioned Mitchell. I expect Mitchell to be in like every single lineup. He's 5,900. He gets 1 million carries every single game. I think that he's someone that I normally don't mind fading just because so much of his volume is on the ground and because he's at such risk of losing red zone carries to Deebo Samuel. But I do think he's going to be heavily owned. I mean, you just look at the slate. We know Mixon's getting all the carries in his offense, but he's quite pricey, and people are also going to want to play Bengals receivers. That Mitchell's going to get all the carries in his offense, some to Deebo, but he's going to get all the running back carries in his offense. And then you just don't know what's happening to their backfields. I mean, Jerick McKinnon and CH split last week. I think that the lean would be that Jerick McKinnon continues his lead. But you can't be 100% certain of that, or you can't be 100% certain that CH doesn't come in and vulture touchdowns. And then on the other side,
by the way, Darrell Williams had 2 touchdowns in their previous game. So, I mean, they like to run the ball up against the Bengals. They like to keep the ball out of Burrow's hands, essentially, and they don't want Burrow getting hot.
And then you look at the other of the Rams. I mean, I'm going to be quite confident rolling with Akers as the workhorse back, but I don't know if the field will be, right? Like he had the fumble late, and then he didn't play in the last drive, which, I mean, they weren't going to run the ball, obviously, in the last drive anyways. But I think because that game didn't go to overtime, no one got to see, okay, what do they do in a neutral situation after Akers' second fumble? To me, I wouldn't read too much into it. I think they basically made Cam Akers the every single snap running back last game. I think that's what we're going to see this game, and he was egregiously underpriced right now at $5K based on the workload that he's received. But I just feel like sentiment because of the fumble, because of the inefficiency, which is kind of a joke to me. I mean, we've been doing this the entire year against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Every running back sucks against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Not lately.
Yeah, because they had Levante David on IR, then he came back.
Yeah, true.
So I mean, they had like 1 month where you could run on the Bucs when their best run defending linebacker was on injured reserve. Otherwise, the whole year. I mean, so I don't know. I think that the risk factor with Akers, if they decide, okay, we need to work in Sony more, but I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that's going to happen or not? I don't think that's going to happen.
So I'm personally on like the side, and I like Akers. I'm not against Akers, but you have a running back that's out for an entire year. Comes back in a critical time where you already have a productive running back that is able to get you the touchdowns. He's able to grind the first downs. I don't understand why they are putting in Cam Akers in right now with the situation that's going on. And even after like the first fumble, I was like, okay, not that big of a deal. They'll probably leave him in, but Sony should at least get a few more touches. I thought that at least Sony would get the red zone work, and that never happened. So even after it's all said and done, my personal opinion is that we will see more Sony Michel, but I feel like that's just an opinion at this case, and we don't have any idea. Like, we can't even guess which route this is going to go. I feel like the right thing to do would be, hey, 60-40 split, at least get Sony Michel working in to see who can be the hot hand.
But the Rams don't like to play that way. The Rams like to have one guy.
And they also like the running backs catching passes, although over the past, ever since Todd Gurley left, they've targeted the running back less than any other team in the entire league. I think I came across like 12.6% of their targets have gone to the running back since Todd Gurley. But obviously the better pass catcher in this offense would be Cam Akers.
And they have used him a little more in the passing game than they have their other running backs, even just in this tiny little sample, right? We had in the first game against the Niners, Akers barely even played. I think he played like 12 to 13 snaps. He still got 3 targets in that 20% tiny little sample. Right. So he got a lot of targets there. And then a little bit misleading, he only had the one catch that was recorded against the Arizona Cardinals, but he also had a catch for about 15 yards that got called back on a holding call. Then he had that other target deep down the field that was a little underthrown. He couldn't pull it in. And then he comes out, he has 3 catches for 20 yards last week. I don't have his target in front of me if it was just 3 targets, if he had any others that weren't caught. But he's been a little bit more involved. You've seen him get some designed looks. I mean, we saw the trick play. Then we saw that deep shot down the field where it's not just purely dump offs, which compared to Sony Michel, when he's been in there as the pass catcher, it's pretty much only been used as a dump off specialist, not as any sort of unique receiving option out of the backfield. I don't know. I think that really what it comes down to is that Sean McVay loves Cam Akers, man. Like when Cam got in there last year, they started to give him all of the work. Nobody else was touching the ball towards the end of the year and into the playoffs. And he was awesome for them in the playoffs last year. And then this year, I think he was going to get all of the work. He tore his Achilles. They held him on this spot all year so they could have the prospect of using him in the playoffs, right? And so obviously you don't do that unless you think that he's going to provide you with a significant value down the stretch. And all it took was essentially one little trial game against the 49ers where he showed nothing in that game, to be honest. I mean, neither did Sony Michel. Nobody ran the ball effectively in that game. But he got like 12 snaps. He didn't do anything with them. And then all of a sudden he was the lead back the following week. He played pretty well in the Cardinals game. And 2 weeks later, he's getting literally every single snap. So I just don't think they're putting the genie back in the bottle. I think they're going to ride him. And I think at $5K, everyone's going to be owned because there's nowhere to hide. But I think he provides excellent projection for dollar.
So real quick, let me go off beat real quick and let everybody know that's watching on Twitter. I see we have a decent crowd over there on Twitter watching. If you guys want to join in our conversation, if you guys want to bring any thoughts in the chat, go check us out over there at youtube.com/fantasy intervention. Once again, that's youtube.com/fantasy intervention. You guys can join into the chat, leave some comments, make sure you guys hit subscribe and like while you're there. We'd love to hear from you guys and love to hear some of the thoughts that are going on inside of our conversation. But on a separate note, right? I want to dive off, get a little bit off topic on this, or a little bit onto a separate view on this and say, hey, like, you should probably be playing a good amount of stacks of Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow, because if you don't, you're going to end up being left in the dust, or there's a good chance that you will be, because if the Rams end up going up and they go by a significant amount, and we have Matt Stafford, who throws for 2 touchdowns and 220 yards. That's not going to be enough to get you there, likely. There's a good chance that Jimmy Garoppolo and his receivers don't connect, and you're left, with 10 points from Jimmy G. And then you're going to sit there and talk about the potential of a shootout over there for the Chiefs and Bengals, which, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's snowing, doesn't matter if it's windy, raining. I mean, we've seen these quarterbacks produce in all sorts of conditions, including the last time they played against each other, which was, I mean, a big one. So,
yeah,
the thing is with this, right? And I brought up the statistics with like, hey, there's only been twice in the past 4 or 5 years that we've seen 2 receivers on the same team eclipse 15 fantasy points for DraftKings in the championship game. And that's primarily because they trust their primary receiver. They target the primary receiver over and over and over again, or the defense takes away one of your options, which are forced to go to the other player. So in this matchup that they had the last time that we played back a few weeks ago, we had, Jamar Chase had 3 touchdowns on 11 receptions, 200 yards or something.
I think it was 11, 266, and 3.
Yeah, it was absolutely
highest scoring
insane.
receiver year, highest scoring receiver game of the entire year, even higher than Gabe Davis last week.
Was it really? Wow.
Yeah, it was.
And then we had, Darrell Williams, who vultured a bunch of carries and ended up destroying all your hopes and dreams of Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah,
also
who now he might not even play
game.
a single snap next week. Like, how quickly things change at running back.
Yeah, it's absolutely absurd. But I feel like at this point, if you end up going in and you front load, this roster, right, your DraftKings roster, and you roll out a Patrick Mahomes, you play him with a Tyreek Hill, you play him with a Travis Kelce, whoever you want. You can end up running it back with a Jamar Chase, with T. Higgins, whatever you want to go there. I'd recommend Jamar Chase, of course. I would still go with him, whether he's chalk or not. I don't care about Tyreek Hill being chalk. I don't care about Travis Kelce being chalk. I don't care about Patrick Mahomes being chalk or Joe Burrow. But if you go the Patrick Mahomes route, you can also sit there and, even with Joe Burrow, you can go Joe Mixon in this one. And this was one of your pieces of advice that you gave to me last week. You said, play Joe Mixon. And I said, no, I don't want Joe Mixon. I was dead wrong on that.
Hey, he didn't get in there. He got outscored by Fournette and Jones. So you get off, you win. You get off the hook.
Well, you also said Jones was in there too. I had Fournette, but you said Jones as well. I didn't like Jones in that one. And to be honest with you, like, I feel like regardless of whatever stack you build, I think there's 2 players that come to me as immediate chalk, and Joe Mixon might be one of them this week. Do you think Elijah Mitchell gets,
Yeah, I think Elijah Mitchell's the most owned, if I had to guess, just due to the savings and due to, I think people like everyone's going to start their lineup with Mahomes or Burrow, right? So if I'm thinking of how I build my lineup, right? I'm starting my lineup with Mahomes and Burrow. And then as soon as I start my lineup with one of them, that leads to me putting in Bengals and Chiefs receivers and tight ends. And so then I got to think, okay, how do I get access to this other game? Okay, Elijah Mitchell, he's right there. So I think he's the most owned. But I think Mixon is going to be really owned too. and Akers probably the 3rd most.
And honestly, I'm okay with Mixon being highly owned. I'm still going to play him. I'm still going to roll him out there. We sit there and we talk about the DOCEScore, the dump off containment efficiency score. You guys can find it over there at fantasyintervention.com/DOCE. It's the dump off containment efficiency score of teams that are good at containing pass catching running backs and teams that are bad about containing pass catching running backs. And I came across this stat earlier as I was diving into it. The Chiefs they're allowing a 6.32, which is 26 dose score to pass catching running backs. But the Chiefs have only allowed one receiving touchdown to a pass catching running back thus far on the season. Obviously, you have to run 10 routes to qualify for that.
Mm-hmm.
In comparison, the Chiefs are allowing like 10.7 points per game to pass catching running backs. Meanwhile, you have like the Jets, right, who are allowing 11.2. However, 3.3 points per game from the Jets are coming from touchdowns compared to zero point 0 or 0.4 points per game against the Chiefs. So the Chiefs are just giving up tons and tons of volume, tons and tons of yards, and they're not allowing tons of touchdowns. However, Joe Mixon, over his past, 8 games, I believe, with over 5 targets, 5 targets or more.
Yeah.
He has, I believe, 3 receiving touchdowns in those 8 games. So he is more than capable of getting a receiving touchdown. And if you get a receiving touchdown from him, you're also be taking a receiving touchdown away from like a T. Higgins or an Uzomah or Jamar Chase.
Exactly.
Similar to the point that you brought up last week. So I feel like if you end up going with a build that's centered around Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill, and I would leave it at that. I wouldn't try maybe a Byron Pringle eventually, however your lineup ends up filling itself in, Miko Hardman even, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But running it back with the Joe Mixon, and maybe even leaving Jamar Chase out of this stack could end up getting you away from the chalk enough, because I feel like 80% of the lineups, or at least 50% of the lineups that have Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce in there will have Jamar Chase in there as well.
I think not, actually. I think Higgins ends up more popular than Chase, just based on the price. Like, you're saving $1,000. And I think that a lot of people are going to want to play the higher priced running back options. And then I think it's going to be really hard for people to not play at least one of Kupp or Debo, especially Kupp. And so I think if you're stacking Mahomes, like I think if you're stacking Mahomes, you're going to play Hill at least, or Kelce, but at least one of the two. And then, you play one of those two, and you want to get in Mitchell, and you want to get in Kupp, and potentially you want to get in Mixon. Like, you run out of money fast, right? So I mean, definitely, by no means am I saying like there won't be Mahomes Hill Chase lineups. Obviously, there's gonna be a lot of Mahomes Hill Chase lineups. I was toying around with it for a while before we got on here, and I was just trying to think, like, not in terms of how I would build, but what I was just trying to do is just think, like, what's the easiest lineups I can build? I'm trying to get myself into the mind of Joe Public, and I just kind of kept landing on more Higgins than I did Chase. And I think it's last week we talked about this. Okay, are people going to play more Higgins now that he's 1,400 less, or are people just going to jam Chase? And last week they ended up about the same. They ended up about the same in ownership, with about a $1,400 gap between them. The gap is slightly less this time, but Higgins also had a good game last week versus, the previous week he was coming off a total freaking dud. So we'll see. The other thing I'd say on Higgins is we just saw last week against the Bills that the Chiefs clearly were not interested in being beaten by Stephon Diggs. And yet they continued to lose corners. And all of a sudden, I mean, they started trotting out the longest yard defensive back crew, right? I mean, we got felon after felon coming up to play quarterback too. All of a sudden, DeAndre Baker is out there, fresh off the street out here covering Gabe Davis. What is their injury situation going to be? Because this team got beat 11-2, 66-3 for Jamar Chase. I imagine that they're going to be shading coverage his way. Is T. Higgins going to be given the same lack of treatment that Gabe Davis saw last week? Because if Gabe Davis is capable of putting up 8, 201, 4 against the Chiefs, I think T. Higgins is plenty capable of putting up a monster stat line if they decide to leave him be. So I'm interested to see what happens in this spot.
Yeah, and obviously, they're going to try and get the ball in the playmaker's hands, but Higgins is just as much of a playmaker as Jamar Chase is to an extent. Obviously, he could end up being a bigger red zone target. Jamar Chase is more of like a deep ball threat type player who can also work
after
in short
the
range.
catch, especially, right? Like you see the fear with Chase. Like, Chase can beat you deep in the sense not just he catches it, but he catches it and runs into the end zone, right? And Chase also, he does like he's the first I've seen since, AJ Brown does it a bit too, but he reminds me of Odell Beckham so much, where he's that guy who can take the slant, 8 yards, and all of a sudden he goes to the house, right? T. Higgins isn't that guy. If if you're playing your safeties back deep, you don't have to worry as much about T. Higgins, beating you after the catch. He's gonna catch the ball where he catches it, and then you're probably gonna tackle him. Like, he's more of that zone beater, that possession guy. But if he's not gonna beat you. He's death by 1,000 cuts. You're not really gonna get beat on a 10-yard slant that T. Higgins takes all the way to the house.
Yeah, you're going to get beat by, a jump ball essentially, or like you said, death by 1,000 cuts. But speaking of death by 1,000 cuts, and to the point you made, how sexy does that make Tyler Boyd, baby?
Oh
But we'll get
gosh,
back to that. We'll
I
get
don't
back
hate
to
it.
that. Really? That's the first time you said I don't hate it to any kind of Tyler Boyd conversation I think you and I have ever had.
No, I
Um,
actually liked Boyd last week. I actually played a lot of Boyd last week. It didn't do anything for me, but I actually played a good amount of him. My thesis point for the game, which was right, although it didn't end up benefiting Boyd, was that the Titans' corners suck, but
yeah.
that their pass rush is elite and the Bengals' O-line sucks. And so that's one of the reasons I picked the Titans in this game, which of course they didn't win, but I was right on that point. Their defensive line would dominate the Bengals. And I just felt that they just weren't going to have enough time to get the ball down deep to Chase and to Higgins. And so I thought we were going to see a lot of Boyd. We ended up seeing a lot of Uzama instead, who kind of filled in that intermediate role.
Yes.
But I thought Boyd had a chance of actually having quite a good game last week. And this week I think he does as well. Most of all, it's just there ain't that many people to play, man. We have 2 games. So
Nope.
if you're on the field, right, got like Boyd and Van Jefferson are 2 guys who they don't usually do a whole lot, but we know they're going to be running a route on like every single snap. And so if you're out there on the field running routes every single snap, like it's pretty easy to talk yourself into those guys, because after you get lower than those guys, then you're dipping into like Travis Benjamin types, right? Like it's like, are they even going to catch a pass? Like
up until last week, right? Like you had Boyd having 4 straight games with a touchdown. So we know that he sees the utilization necessary. Now, you did bring up a great point earlier, and it was kind of like, all right, who do you think is going to be more chalk, Cooper Kupp or Joe Mixon at this point? Obviously, the most expensive running backs or the most expensive player at their positions. And honestly, like I don't care if Cooper Kupp is chalk. Like, I don't care if he is the chalkiest play on the slate, which I think that he very well might be. I think he could be more chalky than a quarterback, to be honest. So, I mean, there was 1 week, right, where he had less than 16 points this entire season. And I know I'm going to, that's insane, right? And that week he still had like, I don't even know, he had like 11 point something points. Anyways, the worst performance that he's had since week 5 is 17.1 points. Yeah. That's nuts.
If that was, I put out a tweet a while ago, but if you take that 16.2, which was, as you said, his second worst game of the whole year, if he had his second worst game of the whole year, every single game this year, he still would have been a top 12 wide receiver in points per game.
Yeah, it's absolutely absurd.
His floor is literally a wide receiver 1. His floor.
So I know that we're going to hear the people saying, "Oh, if you fade Cooper Kupp, you'll beat 20% or you'll be in the 20 percentile of lineups because he failed." And you'll have all this extra.
You're asking for
I'm not doing that. Yeah, yes, 100%. Or you're asking for a decoy situation, which he will still give you probably 20 points regardless. If you don't play him, you're going to watch all of your winnings that you have, right? You're going to see like that total, and it's going to be in the green after the first game. And as soon as 6:30 hits Eastern time, you're going to see your money start to trickle down until you don't have anything left. Because if you're not playing Cooper Kupp in your lineups, I don't care if he gives you a mediocre finish. I don't care if he gives you 18 points. It still would be somewhat worth it at that point to play him, to not lose out on everybody else playing him. I mean, we only have, like you said, so many receivers that are playing this week. Well, only so many receivers can get you north of 16 points, and he's done it as his worst week. Like, at this point, it's not an ROI question, right? Like, I always want to try and triple my ROI. Like, that's my big thing is I want to hit, triple or quadruple the amounts that I'm paying for a player in terms of fantasy points. I don't care for Cooper Kupp because the lump sum, it's like, with bartending, right? Like we try to get an 18% cost for our liquor sales, right? However, if we're selling a well bottle, right, that we want to see 18% on, that bottle might cost us $12, but we're selling for, $6 a shot or whatever. That's great. We're seeing like 15% markup. But if I have a bottle that costs me $100 and I'm selling it for $33 a shot, yeah, I might not make as much of a profit margin on that, but the lump sum is what I'm looking at. And the lump sum for Cooper Kupp is so much more significant than it is for almost any other receiver, regardless of the price. I want that lump sum for a small game slate.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter like what he does ROI wise. I mean, he's going to be one of the 3 highest scoring wide receivers on the slate, or I guess what I should say is, if you're not playing him, he needs to be not one of the 3 highest scoring wide receivers on the slate, right? It's as simple as that. Because if he gets you 20, like, I don't know, are there other players that will? It's not. Yeah, like you mentioned, on a 12-game slate, if Cooper Kupp gets 20, you say, oh, that's easily survivable because he took all this money. I'll be able to get 20 from someone else cheaper, or I'll be able to play someone with a similar price who gets 30. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. It's a small slate, and you need raw points. The most raw points wins. And so if you have Jawan Jennings and he gets 12 and Cooper Kupp gets 20, well, great. Jawan Jennings beats him on the multiplier, but you still got to find 8 points somewhere else. And there's just not that many options. Like we mentioned running back. It's like Joe Mixon and Elijah Mitchell. We know that they will lead their team in carries, barring injury. And after that, there's literally not even another running back on the slate that we know will lead their team in touches, like 100%, right? And so who are you going to play? Like it's not like there's all these endless options of guys to play. So I agree. I'm probably locking in Kupp. I think that the only way that Kupp fails is frankly, like, yeah, he could get you, let's say he gets 18 and then, Chase, Hill, Debo all beat him, right? And that's plausible. But then you still got to play all those guys, and I don't know where you find the funds to do that. So,
yeah, and when it comes to all 3 of those guys beating you out, essentially, like you have to still get significant amounts out of them, and I just don't see that being the case with these matchups unless you're going to see 40-point explosions from some of these players without Cooper Kupp even being a part of that. So I think the Cooper Kupp needs to be locked in. I don't care if you're playing the Chiefs game. I don't care if you're playing the Rams game. I think that he needs to be locked in the lineup. So let's dive a little bit into some of these other plays that might not be as chalky. You brought up Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel, I don't know if he's going to be chalk. I know he's cheaper, but his production was limited last week. Mm-hmm. He's had some off games over the past 2 weeks, if I remember correctly. I don't think that the Deebo Samuel is necessarily chalk, especially dealing with an injury, although I did believe he practiced today.
Yeah, he did practice today. And I agree. I think that's the guy where that's probably where ownership comes off of. Just that's why I think Mitchell's going to end up really high too, because I think people will start with the Chiefs game, right? That's where I think most of the ownership comes from. That's where the quarterbacks come from. And then they look at, okay, who can I play from the other game? And so by the time people start looking at Rams and Niners, they're probably already going to have one of Hill or Kelsey or one of Higgins or Chase, or maybe even 3 of those already locked into their lineup, and then you want to get Kupp in. I think that's the first place you look. And if you have Kupp in your lineup and you have one of Hill or Kelsey in your lineup and you have one of Higgins or Chase in your lineup, you can't have Debo in that lineup. So people are either going to have to choose to play the Rams Niners game primarily over the Chiefs-Bengals game to get Kupp and Debo into the lineup, or people have to pick Debo over Kupp, which I think is not a lot of people are going to do. So I agree. I think Debo's the one that goes under the radar. And yeah, I'm totally open to playing Debo. I mean, we know he has a really, really high ceiling. So I think that's a guy where if you are, fading Cooper Kupp, or if you want to play the Rams side, right? To me, if I'm playing a Stafford stack, that's the first guy I would want to put into my bringbacks would be Deebo Samuel, because I think you're generating more leverage. If you play a Rams stack, like if I play Stafford, Kupp, Mitchell as the bulk of my stack and maybe add some ancillary pieces, but if those are my top pieces, you're only really generating any leverage just on Stafford, because Kupp is going to still make his way into a lot of lineups. Mitchell will certainly still make his way into a lot of lineups. But if you go Stafford, Kupp, Debo, you're forcing yourself off of the main construction, because once you put Kupp and Debo into your lineup, you just can't play one of the top 2 Chiefs and one of the top 2 Bengals. It's impossible. You can't make that work. So I think that's the guy that I'll play most as my bring back with Stafford stacks. And then, otherwise you have to consider, okay, do I play Debo over Kupp if you're playing the other game?
Yeah, and that's tough. And I still see a world where this happens. But Debo, like I said, his efficiency has worried me somewhat in the running game. And I'm just hoping that he ends up seeing targets underneath, because you've heard me talk about this probably 1,000 times. The Rams struggle to cover underneath receivers that see short yardage targets. It's something that I've been talking about prior to the Green Bay game. I mean, I was preaching about it, especially in the Green Bay game, where I was like, you got to play Randall Cobb, you got to play Randall Cobb, you got to play Randall Cobb. Because of the fact that
you did not have to play Randall Cobb. Because Aaron Jones was actually... the Rams game.
I'm talking about the Rams game back in the season.
Oh, okay.
No, because they will let anybody pass underneath to them. And we've seen it multiple
Right.
times. We've seen it with Deebo Samuel twice this year. Deebo Samuel, I think, has like almost 60 points combined in the 2 games they played because they don't cover underneath. They just don't want to get beat deep. And it's somewhat absurd, but the way that they play the slot is very similar to how they play the shortstop with nobody on base, with the first batter up, with no strikes, no balls, no nothing. They play the shortstop deep so they can't pop it over top of the pitcher and get a single right off the bat to get somebody on base. It's the same exact way that the Rams play their defense. They play the slot guy way off, almost at like a safety level. Meanwhile, the safeties almost get prepared to play a cover 3. It's absurd, and it's a little bit complex. However, it's something that allows tight ends to eat, it allows running backs to eat, and it allows slot receivers who play close to the line of scrimmage to eat. When we watch receivers like Christian Kirk who play out of the slot, but they play deep, it doesn't work, right? Guys like Christian Kirk don't produce up against that. It's the players who play close to the line of scrimmage who will get screen passes, who will get underneath balls, who will run crossing routes, and they dominate. So I love Deebo Samuel once again in this matchup, and I'll be playing a good amount of him. He's not going to be a lock like he is for Cooper Kupp for me, but I definitely want him in my lineups. As for Jerick McKinnon, you brought him up. Clyde Edwards-Helaire for me. I mean, I feel like you got to take shots on both those guys. Obviously, Jerick McKinnon's been the more productive back. But we have to keep in mind that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is coming back from injury and now has a full game under slate.
By the way,
he did.
He hasn't looked that good to me since LSU.
He looked amazing. Like he looked like he was killing it. He was killing the game, and obviously Jerick McKinnon looked good too. I don't want to take anything away from Jerick McKinnon. They both look good, and the Bengals is a team that we attacked time after time.
That's one of our favorite teams to attack.
Yeah. When it comes to the DOCEScore, we attack pass catching running backs up against the Bengals because if they play like a decent pass catching running back, they don't really do much, right? And I'm not saying that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a pass catching back because for some reason, Patrick Mahomes doesn't want to use that.
It seems he might be the worst pass catching back of all time.
Yeah, but I mean that's more utilization. So maybe this is Jerick McKinnon game, but still, either one of these guys can do stuff with the ball in their hands if they have open space. And I mean the Bengals, this is what we attack. So I absolutely want to play both these guys. And honestly, I know that you like Akers, but I like either one of these guys over Akers personally.
Well, I will like either one of them over Akers if they are owned less than Akers. Straight up, I would definitely prefer Akers. Straight up, I would take Akers and probably project him as the second highest running back on the slate behind Mixon if his role is the same as it was, because I mean he's going to get the volume. But a little bit of risk to floor for sure with Akers. I love this situation, especially I love McKinnon because of McKinnon's role where, last week I was willing to take shots on McKinnon because I looked at it as, okay, let's just take a bet. Remember we said on this podcast, I said I'm going to play a lot of McKinnon if CH is active. And other people were like, that's kind of crazy. But I was willing to take a shot because I figured, you know what, like even if CH is active, even if his snaps are reduced, like he's going to get so many nice high value touches because they're going to use him as the athletic space back that he is in the receiving game. The only thing that concerned me about Jerick McKinnon last week was when he got subbed out in a couple of goal line situations. That put a little bit of a damper on it because if CH, which is so bizarre, by the way, CEH spent his whole life getting subbed out at the goal line for Darrell Williams, but now we've cast Darrell Williams into the shadow realm and we're subbing out McKinnon for CEH at the goal line. What is this shit? But anyway,
what is this shit?
Yeah, what? CEH is a goal line specialist now? I mean, come on. He's like the worst goal line back of all time. Anyway, coaches. That concerns me a little bit. But no, I'll play either of these guys. I totally agree. I think that both these guys in the snaps that they get are going to have a lot more value on their touches than what Mitchell and Akers get in their snaps. Because, like you mentioned, the Rams don't really throw the ball to running backs. The 49ers really don't throw the ball to running backs. They're also one of the lowest teams in that regard. And Mitchell will never play in the 2-minute drill. He'll never play on the third downs. He'll never play the long down and distance snaps. That's all Kyle Juszczyk country. So I think I agree. When McKinnon and CH are out there, they get higher value touches and they're going to be in the higher scoring game. So I totally agree. I'll play a lot of CH and Jet. I mean, straight up, I prefer to play Jerick McKinnon. I imagine he's also going to be a lot more owned. And it just sort of depends on that scale. It's like, if it's like one's 30 and one's 25, I'll play McKinnon. If it's like McKinnon's 40 and CH is 10, well, then it's like, okay, do I think there's a 4 times better chance that McKinnon outscore CH? Probably not, by that much of a factor. That's when I start to tilt the CH. So we'll see. I'm emotionally preparing myself. I haven't got there yet, but I'm emotionally preparing myself to put Clyde Edwards-Helaire in more lineups than I ever would desire to.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. And I actually love Clyde Edwards-Helaire because I think he's gonna be less popular in Jarrett
Can I
McKinnon,
clip that? Can I clip you saying I love Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
Dude, don't clip that. Please don't clip that. Oh my!
It was
God.
so weird last week, man. I was firing off all
good.
the CEH jokes in the first quarter when it was all McKinnon, and then Clyde comes in and he looks shot out of a cannon. I'm like, who the hell is this guy?
I'm all about Clyde Edwards-Helaire this week. That's it. So
clipping that one too. I'm all about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Chase Vernon.
Oh God. Oh man, don't do that. All right. So George Kittle didn't do much, I believe, against the Rams the last time they played. Hasn't done much all year. But he has these periods where he breaks out. And like I talked about with the Rams, when they play, when receivers or tight ends play close to the line of scrimmage, typically they can dominate. Now, I believe part of the situation had to do with George Kittle and blocking and being almost like a decoy to an extent while they try to utilize Brandon Ayuk and they try to utilize, Deebo Samuel in different types of ways. Meanwhile, Shanahan, he knows what he's doing with games on the line. And I know that the 49ers had to win the last one. They didn't use George Kittle. However, if they start using heavy fronts, right, and blitz heavy fronts that are run blitzes, if the 49ers get down, George Kittle could easily do these block and releases and be left wide open and run like he did, like a stallion, through the open prairies or wherever they run through.
I love it.
Like a stallion, with that gorgeous mane that he has going on. And he could just take off and he could get you 2 touchdowns, especially in the red zone. I mean, if Jimmy Garoppolo is ever a play, I think that George Kittle needs to be a part of that lineup. But even if he's not, as a run back to get contrarian, because I don't think his ownership is going to be through the roof. Meanwhile, his price is only $5K. He's only $5K. I don't think his
ownership's going to be high. I don't.
I think he's a great tight end play.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think he's the third most owned of the tight ends, and I could see a world where he's fourth. Like, I think Kelsey's obviously going to get a lot of ownership. I mean, if you're playing Mahomes or Burrow, you're almost a lock to play Kelsey or Hill. So I think we see tons of Kelsey. And then Higbee has had a really nice role of late. And he was a pretty chalky tight end last week at $4K. He even went down in price to $3,700. So I think, like I said, I think the process of building the lineups, most people will build the parts of the game they're stacking first and then look at the other game. And I just think Kittle ends up lower on the list of priorities, right? Like I think people prioritize Cup, they prioritize filling running backs. Then they're like, how much salary do I have left? And most of the time they don't have enough left for George Kittle. So I think he gets squeezed. And I even think we see Uzama get decent amount of ownership. Like Uzama didn't really do much the whole year, but all of a sudden he's come alive in these playoffs and had 2 really nice games. He's in the game that everybody wants to play. And so it's easier for me to see, okay, well, if I'm just playing this a million pieces of this game, right? Like people will play 6 players in this game. They'll say, okay, well, I'm just going to assume that we just see the game we just saw again. And so everybody gets there, right? Why can't Uzama catch a touchdown? And so he might even get more. Like Kittle ain't going to be owned. And I agree. I'm going to just keep playing Kittle, I guess, until he either gets eliminated or continues to have like 1 catch. But it's infuriating. He was a little bit more involved last week, 4 for 63. That's a step up.
He was the lead receiver, I believe.
Yeah, and if he had caught a touchdown, right, 4 for 63, if he had a touchdown out of that, then we're cooking with gas all of a sudden.
Yeah, you're in the money. Yeah. See, like I think that George Kittle could absolutely thrive. I think that he could be that guy that nobody else plays. Like we talked about halfway through the season, you and I always discuss things that were over Shane's head, such as DFS, type plays. And we always talked about we were playing T. Higgins, right? We're playing T. Higgins till he hits. And then he had the stretch, right, where he hit.
And then did he hit.
Yeah, he hit like crazy for like 3 straight weeks or 4 straight weeks.
Yeah.
George Kittle has the same sort of thing where he doesn't produce. And it's like Shanahan is lulling people to sleep. He's like, okay, go to sleep. Just forget about him. He's just an offensive lineman. And then boom, he goes and he hammers away on Kittle, and Kittle ends up having like 2 or 3 games.
Right? Like we've seen it. We saw 2 weeks in a row. He posted, I think it was 8, 153 and 2, and then like 9, 181 and 1. Right? Like that's the kind of ceiling. The ceiling is he there on the slate and no one's within 15 points of him. Like that is still the ceiling. It's just that the floor is 1 catch for 10 yards.
So at 5K, can I interest you in a double tight end stack, Jacob?
Yeah, I'll play double tight end.
Really?
No, I mean, I'm always pro double tight
shocked.
end if like with a big if. I'm fine with double tight end if the second tight end you're playing and the main tight end you're playing are essentially receivers in terms of their ceiling. But on a short slate like this, yeah, I mean, gosh, right? I mean, if you're looking at just, say you're playing Kelsey or Kittle, right? In a normal slate, I would never play a Tyler Higbee in the flex. But on a slate like this, like let's get down here into the sub 4K range. Who are we looking at? Van Jefferson, 3,900. Demarcus Robinson, 3,800. Tyler Higbee, 37. Uzama, 34. Jennings, 32. Those are the only guys, flex worthy between 3,000 and 4,000. Like, easily, Tyler Higbee can outscore Uzama, Robinson, and Van Jefferson, or Uzama can outscore Robinson and Van Jefferson, right? Even get up a little bit above 4K. We get up to Pirine. Boyd at 4,200 is pretty delightful. But Juszczyk, Pringle, Sony Michel, right? Easily Higbee can be the highest scoring player on the slate, sub 5K. So that's totally fine in this slate to play him as a flex.
This is such a weird show. I'm over here talking about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You're bringing up, double tight ends
slate, man.
And Tyler Boyd. This
slate.
is just weird, man.
It's a 2-game slate. There's nowhere to hide.
All right, so let's talk about Tyler Boyd real quick because we could see, them playing the Kansas City Chiefs with how injured their squad is, making sure that they cover the deep ball, leaving all these underneath opportunities for not only Joe Mixon, by the way, who's been targeted a crazy amount in the receiving game. Uzma, who you brought up. Yeah, absolutely love it. And then Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd's another guy who could be playing the slot. They could ask L'Jarius Sneed to play off a little bit. Is L'Jarius Sneed healthy, by the way?
I don't know. Couldn't tell you.
But Tyler Boyd could see the targets necessary, and he got a touchdown in 4 straight games, along with a touchdown the last time they played. I think it was only like 36 receiving yards, but he still got a touchdown.
Yeah, the only thing I fear with Boyd is the ownership, which is weird because no one's played him the whole year. But just it's scary this week. So we have Jamar Chase at 6,700, right, as the last of the 4 really high dollar receivers, right? Kupp, Hill, Debo, and then Chase. Then we go down to Higgins, 5,700, who kind of exists in his own price class, which is why I think we end up seeing a lot of Higgins. And then it's Beckham and Ayuk, 51, 5K, right? I mean, they have a ceiling, but they also have a floor of like 0 catches. And then after that, like it's Pringle. I mean, he caught a touchdown last week, but like, is Pringle really going to project better than Boyd? I don't think so. Then you have Boyd, and then beneath Boyd, it's Hardman, Van Jefferson, Demarcus Robinson, Jawan Jennings. Like, Boyd to me is just so clearly the best player under 5K, and it's pretty easy to talk yourself into him outscoring, Beckham and Ayuk as well. I feel like a lot of ownership ends up landing on him, but we'll see how people end up building their lineups. I do think, like, just from a pure projection standpoint, he projects great at 4.2K.
See, I feel like Byron Pringle will actually. I think that eclipses the ownership for Tyler Boyd, to be honest.
Oh, I really hope so. I mean, I'd much rather play Boyd than Pringle, honestly. Well, really would.
Pringle's been good, which kind of brings up my next point. Let me go ahead and jump into my next point then.
Pringle's
as we're
been
talking about
patties.
But I mean, all right, so Mecole Hardman, right? He has double-digit points in 3 of the last 5. I think Byron Pringle has 4 of the last 5. Hardman has
one of those games Hill didn't, or 2 of those games Hill didn't play, right? Like, we have to acknowledge, like, week 16, Hill played like a few snaps. He was dealing with COVID. And then week 18 against Denver, Hill was fully out of the lineup with the ankle. So the only games where they've had Hill with his normal role were week 17 at Cincinnati, and then the 2 playoff games, which Pringle's delivered, but he's also scored 3 touchdowns in those 3 games.
Yeah, and by the way, like in Cincinnati, like, Mecole Hardman did not produce. That really was not directly related to that, situation. But anyways, with Mecole Hardman, right? Let me continue on this real quick while I still have it on my mind. He has rushing attempt, at least 1 rushing attempt in 3 of the last 5 games, 4 red zone targets over the last 5 games, 5 receptions of 20+ yards over the last 4 games. And although he didn't produce up against the Bengals, very well, he had like 1 reception for 53 yards, and I think he only had 1 target as well. The Bengals do struggle with speed, and especially speed out of the slot. So since they are so close in pricing, and since we have Tyler Boyd, it's looking to me like Miko Hardman, who has had productive weeks, is probably going to be the least owned out of the three of Tyler Boyd, Miko Hardman, and Byron Pringle. So
Oh
Byron
gosh, yeah.
Pringle has been the most productive, I believe, in terms of fantasy points, but we have had Tyreek Hill out, like you brought up. Uh, Tyler Boyd has been probably the most consistent, but really has very low upside type play. I feel like Miko Hardman out of these three players, if you want to get a little bit ballsy, if you want to get a little bit risky with it, and you want to differentiate your lineups, especially those ones that are built towards the Chiefs stacks, like if you have, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Mixon, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, and you want to get a little bit different, I think that Miko Hardman still offers you a very high ceiling, uh, very low floor as well, but a very high ceiling, and could end up getting you away from the chalk plays to an extent. Is Miko Hardman someone that you're willing to take a shot on? Is it just you want to take a shot on for your Chiefs lineups, for your Bengals lineups? Like, what do you think with Miko Hardman and the rest of this crew?
I can't imagine I play Hardman in a single lineup.
I tried.
He just doesn't play the snaps. Like he had the one game against Denver when Hill didn't play. He played 83% of the snaps and he went 8 for 103 yards. But in these other games, like he's just not getting the snaps. And to me, that kind of kills your ceiling. Like, I mean, he ran as hot as a person could run against the Bills. Like he scored a touchdown on a jet sweep play, and then he caught like a 30-yard catch and run in overtime. He still got like 12 points. Right? Like I don't know. I'm not as sold on Hardman because he needs multiple slash plays, because he doesn't get the ball enough because he doesn't play enough snaps. If I'm going to play in that range, other than Pringle and Boyd, if I'm going below them, I'm either going to do the 2 tight end thing. I'm going to flex Higbee or Zama, or I'm going to play Van Jefferson because Van Jefferson runs every single route, right? I mean, that team lives in 11 personnel. So Van is out there. Pretty much every single route, and we know that he has a high ADOT, right? So there's always a possibility with Van Jefferson. Like Mecole Hardman, he has the speed, but they don't actually throw to him deep. I think it's because he can't track a football. But like they more so use him like for short area quickness. They don't ever really throw it to him deep anymore. Van Jefferson, they will throw too deep, and so you can see him getting that one catch for 60 yards and a touchdown. The other guy on the Chiefs that I might actually play, which makes me want to puke, but I can almost guarantee right now I'll play him more than I'll play Hardman, is Demarcus Robinson, who's basically a traffic cone. But like he actually does play snaps. Like he actually plays about 65% of the snaps, even when everybody's healthy, mostly because he's out there to block on run plays. But he does run some routes. And I mean, he did nothing last week, right? And so he'll be less owned than Hardman. Not that Hardman will be that owned. But Hardman flashed last week. He looked good. He made the big play in overtime. He got the touchdown. Nobody will play Demarcus. But Demarcus had 4 for 76 in the wild card game, and then he had it was 2 for 33 and 1 the last time they played the Bengals. He'll be out there. He'll be running routes. He can find his way into a touchdown. So if I'm going sub 4K, I like Jefferson more. And then I probably like Robinson more than Hardman, just based on that he'll be even less played, but he plays more snaps.
It's the red zone targets for me that are really the things that stands out. I mean, when you're seeing, red zone targets because your team does want to use you in the short area,
red zone shovel passes.
I don't care how you get the red zone targets. I don't care how you get them. I'll take it every time. I think that the biggest thing, although Byron Pringle has been getting more red zone targets, don't get me wrong. I know that they exist. But I mean, Mecole Hardman will still end up seeing, at least 2 or 3 red zone opportunities in this game. And I definitely want that from a guy who knows how to get, into the end zone.
Yeah, Pringle's basically a tight end. Like he's these games, like if you look at those 3 games that he's had where he's been scoring fantasy points, but Hill hasn't been playing, that Hill hasn't playing. Like he's running all the routes and stuff, and he's getting some targets, but his yards per target is like under 5. Like he's just not getting any sort of downfield work, but he is getting red zone work. So he's basically kind of like a Higbee or like a Uzama, where he's out there and he's getting the red zone work. But like all of his totals of his good games are like 5 catches, 30 yards, and a touchdown, right? So he's not getting any downfield work. To me, that makes him like a fade if he's owned, and I think he'll be owned.
So let's go on to one more player that Jacob, I don't know what's happening, man. Like, you were all about this guy, and now you're going back to your ex who broke up with you. Sonny Michel, man. Like, Sonny Michel should see the opportunities. We briefly talked about it earlier. He should see some red zone work. Come on, give me some good news.
Snaps.
I have so many shares of Sony Michel in the rounds that I made it in best ball. I think I have him on every single team that I'm in best ball.
Hey, the one we drafted on stream, we took Akers instead. I have no idea what that team's at, but I know we took Akers, not Michelle.
Non-existing, because if you didn't have Josh Allen, and Gabriel Davis, you didn't make it. But good news is that hey, I have like 10 teams that don't have Gabriel Davis and Josh Allen. However, God man, the close matchups that I had where I didn't make it into best ball. We'll talk about it another time. Anyways. Sony Michel, I think, could see some red zone opportunities, especially if they don't trust Cam Akers this week. I would take a shot on him. I think it's more of a flyer situation. I still would want to just give it a chance, because if Cam Akers fumbles, it's a very, very good chance that Sony Michel sees the rest of the snaps that entire game. If they feel like, hey, we haven't been giving a good opportunity to him, that's fine. And then if they just say, hey, we need to give him a split snap count 60-40, I still think that he could see the red zone opportunity. So I do want to play some Sony Michel. Yeah. Van Jefferson is another dart throw that I wanted to go with. You talked about him running routes, and we talked about the 49ers getting beat deep, and it happens. So I definitely want to take some shots on Van Jefferson. But the one player I want to hear about from you, I want to hear about Kyle, man. I want to hear about
Juszczyk.
Kyle Juszczyk, who for some reason can produce fantasy points up against multiple different teams, but can never produce fantasy points up against the Rams. It's so sad, because I want to find an excuse to play him. I'm not going to have one here, but I just wanted to throw it out there for fun.
Yeah, no for me on Juszczyk. I'm definitely going to play a lot of Van Jefferson. I agree. He runs that high volatility, high A-dot roll, but you get a lot of darts at it because he's always on the field, and the 49ers can definitely be susceptible to the deep ball. And then, the Michel thing, I'm totally fine with playing Michel. He's not going to have ownership, and you never know what the Rams are going to do. There's a world where they roll up and Sony Michel's out there for the first drive because Cam Akers fumbled last week, and they decide to give Sony the lead role. And you're like, oh my God, Sony Michel's 3% owned. And that's the guy who just won the entire tournament for people, because now he's going to have 20 points, so I'm open to Sony. I think it's a pretty binary outcome. I think what's happening with your Sony lineups, like in drive one, but I'm totally willing to take a couple shots at it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's something I swear I want to mess around a little bit with Sony Michel, just test the waters, because if you don't, and he has a enormous game because the running back slate is so just, torn up, he could end up being that tournament breaker for you.
It could be like Jerick McKinnon in the divisional round, right? Where like he was barely owned because people assumed Darrell Williams is going to be the lead back. And then like drive one, it was like, oh, Darrell Williams is a 33% owned third down back, and Jerick McKinnon is the guy, and 2% of lineups have him. And if he goes off, then those lineups win, and he went off.
All right, so Jacob, I know you got to go. I see your message in the private chat. Do you have time to build a lineup real quick?
Real quick, yeah, like real quick. It's going to be a blitzkrieg lineup.
All right, give me 1 second to pull this up. I'm losing time right now. I didn't have it pulled up prior to. All right, let's build a lineup with DraftKings. All right. So let's start with the quarterback position. I'm okay rolling Matt Stafford with this one. If you'd rather go Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, up to you.
Stafford's fine.
Cool. We might as well keep fading the chalk and keep missing out on big opportunities.
Yeah, it's great.
For the running back position, Joe Mixon agreed upon?
Yeah, I'm fine with Mixon.
All right. I guess we need to go with a stack, get Cooper Kupp.
Yeah. And I would play, do you want to play Clyde or McKinnon? Because to me, if we're fading the quarterbacks in that game, I want to play both running backs in that game. Yeah,
let's go with Clyde Edwards. I'm down for that. He looked like gold. We talked about it. That was a fun one. I still like Jarrett McKinnon, but it is what it is. Do we want to play George Kittle as a run back? Since we were
I'm fine with the Kittle play. I like the Kittle play. Yeah. And do we want to add Van too? Or just talking about Van?
We could add Van. Let's save him as an option for this play. But let's see how much money we have after we lock in a couple of these studs real quick. But let's get a defense in here first. I feel like if we end up going with the Bengals defense, there's nothing really that could, good that can come of that.
I think we go with the Chiefs defense because we know that the Bengals can get obliterated on the O-line, and then we just hope that this game kind of dies because the Chiefs keep sacking the Bengals.
I'm completely cool with that, and I don't mind paying up a little bit in that range. So, and plus we're not playing that game heavy right now. So,
Yeah.
if Joe Mixon gets a touchdown or two, that's fine. It's not going to destroy us if we end up with 5 sacks and interception return for a touchdown or something.
Yep.
All right, so we're left with about $5K per person. So this makes sense for the Van Jefferson play to come in.
Yeah, we need another Ram anyway. If we're playing Stafford, we got to play another Ram pass catcher. So I like the Van one. And then what do we got here? 5,400. So
we got to get a Chief in there.
Yeah, we do.
Another one. I know we already have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire is primarily going to be used in the red zone, so we need to get a way to get to the red zone. I almost like Travis Kelce, but I wouldn't mind Tyreek Hill either. I know that both those guys are extremely expensive, but
I would go with Hill, and then I would probably play Higbee, and then because we're already betting on Stafford, and with this, it's 2 games, so I'm probably playing 3 pass catchers with every quarterback in this one because you run out of spots. But like Higbee fits in with 3,700, or we could go with Juwan Jennings and do the double bring back. But I just think Juwan Jennings and George Kittle kind of operate in the same area of the field and take up a lot of targets that we're hoping go to Kittle.
They do to an extent, but I think that Juwan Jennings could also see a few targets on the outside, or they can move Kittle around to the outside. Maybe Kittle ends up finishing up with, 9 receptions for 80 yards and no touchdowns. Meanwhile, Juwan Jennings could end up sniping all those touchdowns. And I'm okay with Kittle if he ends up with 80 yards, receiving and multiple receptions if he does not get a touchdown. I'm cool with that. I think that's in a realistic realm of possibilities.
Well, who do you prefer here? Do you want to go with Higbee, Jennings, or Uzama? Those are pretty much the options.
I'm going to go with Jennings because I'm afraid that Higbee gets taken some red zone opportunities away by Odell Beckham and that they could end up going other places. But, Odell can end up with 1 reception for a touchdown and, 10 yards at this point.
All right, I got to run, but I like this lineup. This one's winning the million for sure, or whatever contest we're entering in.
We're in one of them. All right. Appreciate you for tuning in. You have a chance to let everybody know where to find you. You got to go.
Absolutely. I'll do it real quick. FF_RTDB. You can find me on Twitter. You can find my DFS content, playerprofiler.com. Same place you can find Chase's. I will have my conference championship Pareto Principles breakdown. Last week, we got pretty much everything right except for the case that then Chiefs-Bills came and just stomped all over our glorious Ram stacks. But it'll be a lot of fun talking through this week's slate. We'll be able to go real in depth with all the players and stuff. It's such a short slate. So come catch me on there and for everything else. And if you've enjoyed hanging out with me for the last hour, I'm going live in 15, 20 minutes with Tom and Billy for the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast, which is now on Tuesdays from now until at least the start of next season. So come catch us there as we kick off season 2, episode 1 of the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast. Otherwise, I'm out.
Peace, Jacob. And thank you guys for checking us out. Make sure you guys go check us out on youtube.com/fantasyintervention. See y'all later.